Welcome to the Athens State University Writing Center presentation on interacting with sources. Now, there are many differences between undergraduate and graduate work, but one of the most important is engaging with scholarly sources. You can think of an undergraduate degree as providing the fundamentals needed to form a knowledge base in a given field. A graduate degree will familiarize you with some of the specific ways that scholars create new knowledge about a set of topics. The primary vehicles for creating new knowledge are the academic journal article or the academic book. Now, these formats are dense and hard for beginners to understand, and with this lack of understanding often produces really poor engagement with the important ideas that are in these sources. Most of the papers that you write for graduate level classes will ask you to read, comprehend, and interact with complex source material. We'll look at some strategies here for understanding and using those academic sources well in your own writing. The first step in understanding a piece of published research is to read it, but it's probably not the kind of reading you may be used to. Many students attempt to read academic research in the same way that they would a short story or a novel, and it ends up being very difficult to read it in that way, mainly because research writing is usually structured in a very specific way. Now, even though articles and books may not explicitly list different subsections, most authors are following an established set of conventions for how research is popularly written about. Research articles and book chapters are normally going to contain an introduction. Introductions are typically broad-based but short explanations for the context of a study. You can pause and read this example of an introduction from an academic article now and try to figure out what are the specific elements of it that signal it's an introduction to you. There were several paragraphs before this paragraph in the introduction to the article, which is common. This is the one that really signals it as an introduction. You can see even in the first sentence, the author is signaling what their main argument is going to be, while also providing some information about how they're going to proceed with that argument throughout the rest of the text. The next section of an article is usually the literature review. This is a collection of different but related sources about a topic in question. Academics normally only write about topics that are significant to other academics within a field or a subfield. This is signaled through a literature review that shows many people are concerned and writing about this particular topic. This is the area that trips up a lot of students because generally after a nice clear introductory paragraph like the one that we just read, an author will launch into a volley of different sources that are seemingly unrelated to the topic at hand. You can pause and read through this brief example of a literature review that occurred right after the introductory paragraph. It seems out of place to move from such a clear description of the intent of the article to a 1981 interview with Michel Foucault. But what this section is really doing is providing a background of different source authors that have commented on the study of body and society. And you could see through that individual subdivision there that this section is going to be all sources about body and society. This particular article had several sections of the literature review that covered different areas that will eventually form the basis for the author contribution. Many students end up being confused by this layout and end up trying to cite information from a literature review, which is simply a citation of a citation and something that you should avoid. Literature reviews do provide great overviews of different subjects with a lot of different citations that can direct you to further reading for a project. But if we're trying to figure out what this article is really about, we're going to need to move to the next section, which we call the author contribution section. The author contribution will differ depending upon the field in which you are in. In the sciences or social sciences, the author contribution is frequently an experiment that may be done by one or more people, complete with a methods section that details how the experiment was completed and a results section detailing what the actual results of the experiment were. In the humanities, it's much more likely to find a traditional argument section, where an author is commenting on a specific set of sources, beliefs, or traditions, and then forwarding their own interpretation based on those different sources. You can pause here and read this example of an author contribution from the article that we've been considering. Don't forget to consider topic sentences, even when you're looking at a really complicated project like this. You can tell from the first sentence here that the author is not describing any other sources, so we can tell that it's not a literature review. They're actually starting with a bit of an argument about how religionists should repudiate all that's been learned about social power, but then they're qualifying that argument and further explaining their position, using the sources that they covered in the literature review as support. The author contribution is going to be the most important part of the article for you, and a part that you'll want to draw on in your own writing and to interact with. Finally, most articles end with a conclusion, which is relatively straightforward. The conclusion usually functions as a space to allow authors to wrap up their ideas and perhaps explain their future plans for publication. These are interesting to read, but usually not as central to the article as the main contribution the author is making. Now that we've moved through the different sections of an academic article, we want to talk about how to interact with those sources. That's one of the primary reasons why you're reading other research in your field, is to be able to interact and comment on them, and hopefully form your own original contribution in the way that your source authors are. The biggest stumbling block that students make is they try to pull citations or information from within a literature review and then attempt to comment on them. Generally, the literature review is only providing background information, so you're missing the main point of the article. Remember, your professors are largely familiar with the sources that you're going to be citing in this class, so it's going to be very easy for them to see that you're pulling from just a literature review as opposed to the author's contribution, and they're going to want you to pull from that author's original contribution. Once you've read through and located that contribution, you can do a few different things with it in the space of your text. You can agree with the author's argument or experimental model, and it's really easy to do. We have the example here. I agree with this person's argument about this. You can do the same thing at agreeing, only in the negative, so you can disagree with someone's interpretation about a text. Or you can extend a claim. You might find one author's interpretation of a text applies equally well to another author's text. You can then extend that original author's argument and apply it to a new set of texts. There are also many different ways that you can pull in, incorporate, and respond to different authors that are in your texts. Ways to learn this are from the actual readings that you're doing for your courses. Don't just think of research papers as being integral to you reading and writing. There are ways that will teach you how to write about new ideas. An important part of this process is to keep research notes. Cite authors by last name and page number so that you don't get lost when you go back to write a text, and that you can actually remember some of the things that you're reading about. Not every article will use the models covered in this presentation, but regardless of your course of study, a good research article is always going to have some kind of an introduction, some kind of a review of literature, and some kind of an individual contribution being made by the author. Many articles are not written to be read in a word-for-word fashion like we're used to reading. You can skip around these articles depending upon your need. If you're evaluating whether an article is suitable to write about, then perhaps just read the introduction. If you're looking for a variety of different sources about a topic, then a literature review is a great place to start. If you're looking for the author's contribution, then locate the area where they conduct an experiment or make an argument. Writing about these sources is complicated, and in many ways isn't like a bicycle. It doesn't get easier, especially as the things you're reading become more complex. You can, though, get help from the Writing Center. We have dedicated graduate writing support specialists that are here to help you navigate these issues. You can visit our website located here or give us a call at the phone number listed below.